Good morning, guys. I'm Joe Justice. I'm a business process consultant with Scrum Incorporated, and I own my own automotive manufacturing business, Team Wikispeed. And I'd like to talk about how test-first practices have allowed us to iterate new product development about 10,000 times faster than industry norms. I was actually asked to share this information with Volkswagen this same week. Volkswagen, I guess. And I said, no, we need to share with Agile testers first. That said, I might be going to Airbus next on Thursday, so we'll see how this goes. You may have seen me or Team Wikispeed or Scrum Incorporated on the Discovery Channel. You might have seen us in Forbes or CNN Money or Fortune. We're lucky enough to be well covered as the impacts of Scrum are being realized across all business. In 2006, the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize was announced, and in 2008, they said there would be a $10 million prize purse to find out if it was even possible to make ultra-efficient cars. They chose to use the United States fuel efficiency and safety tests. However, it was an international challenge, attended by companies from all around the world. The vehicles would have to achieve more than 100 miles per gallon, city and highway, US. In England, that would be 136 miles per gallon, approximately, on the England driving cycles. Or in Germany, that would be more than, I think I've converted this correctly, 2.5 liters per 100 kilometers. In Japan, 1 liter per 100 kilometers. At that time, the closest we had were like bobsleds. They achieved over 100 miles per gallon, but they held one occupant and they did not meet road legal safety specifications in the United States. I joined the X Prize as well, and I started with a sticky note on a whiteboard in my garage that said, "Win the X Prize." It was in the backlog column. When I went to pull it into in progress, I said, well, I need to split this a little smaller. So I split it into build a 100 mile per gallon, ultra-efficient, ultra-low emissions car, and then build a car that passes all safety specifications. Then I split those into each of the fuel economy tests and each of the federally mandated vehicle safety specification tests. Now notice those are all tests, and I hadn't drawn a picture of a car yet. One of those tests was an emissions test, the exhaust coming out of the back of the car. It had to be ultra low, ultra clean. We're probably the first car company in the world to buy an emissions test machine before we drew a picture of a car. By building in the ability to test first, we were able to prototype lean solutions faster than anyone else, building only enough to pass the test, and then refactoring to increase scalability, durability, affordability, etc., without increasing scope. That let us build this orange, hideously ugly thing here in just 3 months. We didn't win the X Prize. We tied for 10th place. That means we outlasted more than 100 other cars from companies around the world, including some large names like MIT, Tesla, Mahindra, and others. But we knew people wouldn't want to drive this into work every day, or only very few people. Yeah, right. And we were invited to the largest auto show in the world, Detroit, Michigan, January 2011. We knew we needed a more beautiful car if we were going to not be laughed out of the show. So our test was everyone in the team thought it was gorgeous. We put that in the backlog and started iterating on what to do. We called companies that could make prototype car bodies for us, but the very cheapest bid we received was $36,000 and 3 months lead time. The show was in less than 3 months. We couldn't engage. So I took time off my day job as a .NET developer and Scrum coach, and I went to composites school. Our tests were miniature versions of the car machined out of foam. We would lay carbon fiber over them and test different composite techniques. This let us develop a composite technique that let us build the car in 3 days for $800. Here's what that looks like. We machine the car full size in foam, then we lay it up in structural carbon fiber, and on the 3rd day we go to the largest auto show in the world. They liked it so much they put us on the main floor between Ford and Chevrolet. I thought we still might get laughed out of the conference. Interestingly, all the CEOs that came by, including the lead of Mercedes-Benz and American Honda Motor Company, for example, shook my hand and said, "Good job, go get 'em." That led us to be filmed by the Discovery Channel in a miniature documentary, which some of you might have seen. Then we received this rendering from someone out there on the internet, Rob Moorbacher of More Composites. We voted as a team unanimously. That's what we wanted to build. Our Scrum teams put it together backstage at the show where we announced it in 2.5 hours. This was attended by Deloitte Consulting's Center for the Edge. They wrote an article in CNN Money and Fortune saying this is how every company should train their staff to move and develop new product this quickly. As a result, we get to do something special here today. We use building our car as a training on how to use Agile, Lean, and Scrum and test-first development in hardware projects. And you guys are all invited to participate later today. I was just informed our first car in Europe landed at the Frankfurt airport last night, and it's in Berlin this morning. Unfortunately, it's in 8 pieces. So we're going to have a backlog item on the wall out in the lobby that says, let's put these 8 pieces together so we can play with this car. And as soon as it comes into the hotel, we'll make an announcement, and you guys are all invited to pull backlog items with us and help rewrite our backlog as tests to build that car. We use the techniques the fastest moving software teams use: Agile, Lean, and Scrum. Now, this crowd, I like to think, is a little more tech savvy, especially when it comes to test-driven development and the XP practices. We aspire to use all of the XP practices. And every time we do have enough restraint to use test-driven development, we go faster and build cheaper. We call this process extreme manufacturing. A group in France called this the greatest common good for our future. Now, the French are a little dramatic, but I like that. That sounds good. Let's do that. These methods are now being used by other companies and some of the largest players in the world. On the left, we have the F-35 aircraft. Parts of it are being built by all of the world's largest defense companies, but the majority share is owned by Lockheed Martin, the largest military defense contractor in the world. That plane is $143 billion over budget. That's not the whole budget, that's just the overrun. It's at least another year late. They're currently blaming software integration, but I think it's a little more broad a story than that. The cost per plane for one plane grew from $273 million to $337 million. Meanwhile, over on the right, we have Saab aircraft. They started building their Gripen multi-role attack fighter about the same time as Lockheed started the F-35 project. Those fighter jets have the similar mission. They're both multi-role joint strike fighter aircraft. So it's an attempt at the same problem, started about the same time. They release new versions of that jet every 6 months on an iteration cycle. In that cycle are software updates and hardware updates. The first version of the Saab Gripen didn't have mid-air refueling. 6 months later, they released a Saab Gripen with mid-air refueling and were able to add that feature back to their first release. They've now had 3 releases in the marketplace. They're 3 iterations ahead of Lockheed, and they're about to have their 4th. As a result, companies that had committed to buy the F-35 are now buying the Saab Gripen, including the entire army of Brazil, which reminds me fondly of last night. The cumulative program cost of the Saab Gripen is $15 billion. That's 10% of the budget overrun of the F-35. They have a new iteration of all systems released to market to buy every 6 months. And the cost per plane is 20% of the F-35 at $43 million. Lockheed was thrown into such turmoil by this that they said they're going to have to retrain all of their engineers. They brought us in, Scrum Inc., to retrain all of their staff on Agile methods and what we call extreme manufacturing.
Some Silicon Valley engineers who work on top-secret military space systems got to test their problem-solving skills today. Lockheed Martin challenged them to a down-to-earth project, building a car in just one day. ABC 7 News business and technology reporter David Louie is live in Sunnyvale. David, did they make their deadline?
They did make their deadline precisely 9 hours later. You know, engineers are always fond of saying they're up for a good challenge, and the executives here at Lockheed Martin decided it might be good to help them push their thinking through, to think outside the box. And they found the perfect vehicle to do it, this car.
1, 2, 3.
Lifting off a tarp isn't quite as dramatic as a spacecraft liftoff, which is a routine part of their work. But these engineers couldn't be happier about how this day-long project ended.
My name is Amanda Fu, and I'm a rocket design manager here at Lockheed Martin.
And what do you know about building a car?
0.
That's how these 200 engineers started out their day. Their goal, to build a car rated to go 100 miles per gallon. It was a team-building exercise by Lockheed Martin to inspire its engineers to rev up their creative juices and to get them to be better problem solvers.
It means that failure is not an option. They have to very quickly pick up the task, find their way through it, make sure they're doing it correctly the first time, because there's really no time to cycle back through it. And even in the normal products we build that take much longer, that's still a truism that they have to live with.
This wasn't designed to be a simple assembly process. Curves were thrown in to create challenges.
We have about 4 inches of error in the drive assembly, so we have to adjust where the tires are, adjust where the wheel assemblies are, and adjust ultimately where the engine is.
Easy to fix?
Easy-ish. Easier than the body.
The car itself is a prototype created by Wikispeed, an organization working toward a highly efficient commuter car. A buyer has paid $25,000 to take this team-assembled vehicle home. And by working all day as a team, Lockheed Martin employees hope to walk away with new skills to use in their daily work.
My group does a lot of supply chain strategy, so if we can see how things are built, see what the parts do that our group is buying, it really helps us understand how we contribute to the organization.
In Sunnyvale, David Louie, ABC 7 News.
Then Boeing flew 27 of its executives to my garage, and they hosted a white tablecloth dinner in my garage. I was embarrassed. My garage isn't the cleanest. We all got drunk together, and we built a car. Now they're using XP practices, Scrum, and they're already using Lean Plus, as they call it there, and Agile methods, so extreme manufacturing, in Boeing Commercial and Boeing Military. Then John Deere flew, the largest agricultural machinery company in the world, flew 3 of their managers to my garage. We got drunk, and we built a car. They then flew me to their headquarters. That's how this works. Hashtag table 2. They then flew me to their global headquarters in Moline, Illinois, to train their new product development teams for combines, tractors, seeders, and other harvesting equipment. So the folks that design that hardware and build the business cases for those new hardware implementations. 16 months later, they achieved 7.2 times their initial velocity per employee that met the same or higher quality specification. They didn't have to fire anyone. They didn't have to hire anyone. The same people were now outputting as much as 7.2 of the same people 16 months earlier. Now, it took them 16 months to get there, but that blew all of our minds. We would have been happy with 10% gain. 7.2, they were now able to out-engineer any other company in their space. They said, can this be repeated in other geographies and other cultures? And they brought us to Pune, India, where they designed new tractors, combines, seeders, harvesters for the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Korea. So a lot of rice preparation, for example, and many other pieces of equipment. They started 3 months later, and they were on exactly the same trend line. In 13 months, they'd achieved 5.6 times the same velocity. Now, interestingly, at the same time, John Deere had performed their internal company happiness and company-wide evaluation of how happy they are in their role and with the company. Everyone on these teams reported they were happier working with Scrum, working with extreme manufacturing, than they had been ever in their career before. And they weren't working longer hours. That sounds like snake oil. It sounds too good to be true. But for some of the people in this room who have done Scrum well, you might have a similar story. Now, that team you just saw was 5 people plus their Scrum coach. So they had a half-time Scrum coach that would rotate between 2 teams. We know that Scrum teams are smaller now than we used to think. We've seen more than 1,000 Scrum teams run through more than 1,000 sprints. And we see the fastest teams are 4 to 5 people, 4.6 on average. So that's exactly what John Deere did as well. This stuff is so new that people are still having laws named after them. Their internal Agile coach, George Tome, one of their internal Agile coaches, he said, well, if we've sped up new product design and business case development, there's still the section that happens before, where we missionize the idea and fund the concept. And then there's the part that happens afterwards, where we produce the good and then package it for delivery. So the production engineering and the manufacturing. He said, even though we've scrummed the new product design, and it's much faster than it ever was before, the total time to customer is only 3 months faster, because everyone else is still slow. He said, if you add up the time of all the teams flowing across the value stream map of the delivery, you have your commercialization velocity, how fast you actually get to market. It's very simple math, but believe it or not, this actually became a law just recently. And that was the justification for why Scrum Inc. just got back from visiting John Deere to help teach extreme manufacturing to the factory floor, to the folks assembling the tractors and combines now. We expect to deliver an entire season earlier to the customer. Then they flew us to Kaiserslautern, Germany. In 2 months, they doubled velocity. In Indaiatuba, Brazil, in 2 months, they doubled velocity. And that's become the average we've seen in companies that I've had the luxury to visit. In 2 months, they output twice as much work that meets the same quality metric with the same people, and they report that they like it better. Then Raytheon, the company that makes the Patriot missile system, among others. Then Xbox One. I was one of the 2 Scrum coaches for Xbox One, and I got to play Xbox One before it came out. That was kind of awesome. And then HP Labs in Palo Alto. And then the Netherlands. This is a Volvo being driven with TomTom running in the navigation. And if you look at the watch the driver is wearing, TomTom is also running on the watch. Now, this picture was taken a year ago, before the Google Watch or the Apple Watch. These items had been in the backlog of TomTom for years. They weren't able to deploy to a Volvo, and they weren't able to deploy to a watch, and they'd wanted to for years. Every company I visit has a backlog of all these good ideas, but not enough speed to deliver them. They say they don't have enough people, but I've never seen a company that didn't have enough good ideas. I've only seen companies that didn't have enough ability to deliver those good ideas to keep up. Well, at TomTom, they didn't hire more staff. Instead, they did Scrum well with a whole bunch of Agile, Lean, and Scrum coaches from Xebia. As a result, the Scrum team got caught up with all of the previous deliveries and deployed both of these to a Volvo and a watch in 1 week. Then they showed me the first EduScrum school. There's EduScrum schools all over the world now, but I got to visit the first. They teach all subjects, kindergarten through high school, using Scrum, and the students finish the semester 20% earlier with 10% higher test scores on average. Then I was invited to the UNESCO World Heritage Headquarters in Paris, France, for the Global Summit on Sustainability. And I was asked to brief the attending EU delegates on how to stabilize the European economy and the euro. Right. I don't have a finance background. All I knew about was Scrum and my overdeveloped car company hobby. So I talked to them about that, and the EU delegate from Norway said, that's it. When a company asks to be restructured and get a bailout from the EU government, we ask for their 5-year restructuring plan. 1 month into that plan, the marketplace has changed. However, we still penalize them if they deviate from their plan. So at the end of 5 years, they exit restructuring and they're market irrelevant and go out of business. He said, wouldn't it be cooler if we used an Agile method and each week we would say, what are you going to do next week? Or what did you do last week to improve the viability of your company? And then the EU government would fund them with enough run rate for the next week. In that way, we'd be better stewards of our investment. And he said, our job is to pass legislation that makes Scrum the default way to run companies in the EU. Oh, well, that's awesome. And then I went on a world tour visiting pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies and companies of all type globally, including one of the companies that 3D prints human organ tissue, which was awesome, all using Scrum. Now, what they didn't realize at the time, but I bet a lot of people in the room realize, is by being able to 3D print human organ tissue, suddenly pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies can use test-driven development. They can print human liver tissue with and without cancer and say, what's the cheapest, simplest, fastest way to get the tissue with cancer to turn into the tissue without cancer? That's brand new, that's not been possible before, and they don't know it yet because they don't have a whole room of testers in the room to rescue them. Then the banking sector called, and I worked with two of the larger banks in the largest bank in North America, and then also Pictet Bank, the largest privately held bank in the world. The minimum amount to open a personal account with Pictet Bank is 10 million euro. The normal account size for a personal account is 100 million euro. They specialize in banking for the world's oligarchy. The session before mine was how to stabilize the Middle East through their investments, because they said the investments we're making are creating conflict in the Middle East. So how do we make as much money while disincentivizing armed conflict? So these people at least think that the decisions they're making with their money are creating or not creating war. Then they said, would Joe Justice please come up to the stage, and would you tell us what's going to shape our investments over the next year? I talked to him about Scrum, because that's what I know, and this is the part that got them really excited. This is 12 years of data from the Standish Company, On the left, we see 29% of waterfall projects are complete and total failures, all ROI lost. Agile projects have a 9% loss. Some of these wealthy families stood up right then and said, "You mean that if we invest in Scrum companies, we'll have a 311% reduction in return on investment risk?" I said, yeah. And they were pretty excited. And they said, that's almost as good as the fact that we have a 350% increase in total recognition of ROI across our investment portfolio. They've started talking to Scrum Inc. about the Scrum Inc. Index fund that only invests in Scrum companies. Now, if the wealthiest people in the world are talking about only investing in Scrum companies, maybe there's something interesting there. Now, if any of that stuff was interesting, you can refer to it or get the numbers behind it from scruminc.com. So you can go deeper, read the footnotes, or send data to someone you know that might be interested. As all this was going on, I was an independent car hobbyist, traveling around the world and doing some Scrum consulting. That caught the attention of Dr. Jeff Sutherland, the guy who ran the first Scrum team in 1993. He said, "Joe, I want to Scrum your career." I said, "What does that mean, Jeff?" He said, "I want you to make twice the money in half the time." And I said, "Let's talk about that, Jeff." He hired me, and he paired me with who's now my product owner, Christine Mooney, who's here at the conference to help all of us learn how to build a car with Scrum. And with the team at Scrum Inc., we became more clear on object-oriented architecture. So here's the 8 modules of the Wikispeed car being assembled: the door skins, the rear clam, the front clamshell, and even the air vent. By first determining a less than 10 module split and identifying the contract of how those modules fit together, the contract first design, we're able to iterate within a single week. We formalized what we thought we knew about that, and then Volvo did it. And not just Volvo, this is becoming the normal way to do it. So now they have fixed, firm, and flexible sections all across their, what they call their SPA architecture. This was just announced August 13th this year. Also, military drones and missile systems are now using contract first design the same way software companies are. So what I'd like to ask the people in this room is please don't limit the good you can do to just software companies. Please go out to the wealthiest, fastest moving companies in the world, demand twice the money you're making now, and show them how to do the stuff that you learned when you were getting your bachelor's degree. Then we worked as a company to create Scrum at scale. Now, many Agile groups and providers have composed methods to scale Scrum across thousands of teams and tens of thousands of employees. My coworker, Alex Brown, composed a vocabulary to describe and compare all those methods. It's turning out it's allowed people to discuss the problem of scaling Agile methods so clearly that it's becoming a method all on its own. But now let's talk about how Test First actually is going to save the world. Here's one of our early tests in Team Wikispeed, the car company. We're doing the frontal impact and offset frontal impact test, then the side impact test. By simulating these tests first, we were able to design what we thought would be the simplest, cheapest, fastest thing to pass this test. Then we physically performed the test. And this, to us, wasn't pass-fail. To us, this was a validation of our tests, our automated test suite, because this is expensive and takes a long time. But an automated test suite, we can fire off every sprint or every gated check-in of our 3D files. That let us update the simulations to better reflect the actuality, and then we would invite kids over to work for free with their parents to implement the solutions. we'd put in the backlog, let's speed up our tests. And we'd put in the backlog, how are we going to reduce time to run our tests? So improving tests is one of the cards that circles through our backlog. And we try to be specific and name the test that's our current bottleneck. Then our Scrum teams look at the backlog, grab one of those cards, and attempt to make the test run faster. Here's an Arduino Uno. It's a little smaller than a smartphone. It's $24 US. It's an open source circuit board that lets us run tests. And we can plug it in to talk to the car. So this one accelerates the gas pedal and lets us simulate the fuel economy tests in any country. By plugging it in and pressing go, we don't have to deliver our car to Argonne Labs in Michigan anymore, which we couldn't do every week. But we can run this test in 7 minutes.
Quickie Speed SGT01 pulling away from a stop sign outside of Hillsdale, Michigan. Driver Brian Ford, passenger Joe Justice, and this is Rod Beresford. Holy cow, they're just gone, Johnson. That's that.
However, we still enjoy manual testing. Then on the digital version of our backlog, we put a card in that said save the world. And it was up to the teams coordinating using Scrum of Scrums in 20 countries to figure out how they were going to solve that problem. Because we said if this stuff really works, and if we're really going this fast, we should do it for something worth doing, something that's transcendent, and something we'll feel really happy about when we're on our deathbed. Someone wrote 3 user stories and 1 acceptance criteria and put them in our backlog for the product owner to prioritize. As a human being born on this planet, I have access to a clean bedroom. As a human being born on this planet, I have access to a clean bathroom. As a human being born on this planet, I have access to a lockable front door. And the acceptance criteria was it had to cost less than $100 US. So that's what, like €4? Team members interpreted this card different ways. One of the tests was to take waste material from designing our cars, in this case insulated foam, which we make our molds out of, and make a micro house. This is version 1. Open Source Ecology, collaborating with us, is now in version 4, and we hope to make a meaningful impact in reducing involuntary homelessness worldwide. The only way that's practical or affordable is because we use test-first development, just like most of the good developers in this room. This brings me to what I think might be the whole point. If Agile is a mindset, reduce the cost to make change, and if Lean is a mindset, use less stuff without frustrating your customers, then test-driven development might be build just enough to save the world. I'm going to invite you guys to a blowout build party as soon as our car gets here. We're going to try to make this using Scrum, coordinating teams using Scrum of Scrum. Now, the backlog I have is all written like tasks. I could use a hand prepping that backlog to rewrite it in terms of tests, because we always get better and more innovative solutions when we do. Unfortunately, we're going to start with this. But I think we can get there during 4 sprints of about an hour long during sessions throughout the day. Folks, that's it. Scrumcat says extreme manufacturing is some really serious shit.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Okay.
Hi, Joe. Very inspiring talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I had a question. You talked about a bank investing in Scrum, only in Scrum companies.
Yes, Pictet Bank, the Scrum Inc. Index Fund.
Okay. What about all the other methodologies that people are using that are also successful?
Oh, sure, like Kanban, like for the 1% of people that do it, Crystal. Although the 1% of people that do it well. Crystal and Crystal Clear. That's what you're talking about, right? Or if people who are using XP alone, maybe without any part of Scrum, right? Right. Yeah, thanks. He said, is the investment specific to only Scrum or any successful Agile team? Here's the problem. Most other types of Agile methods don't measure velocity. Without measuring velocity, we have difficulty knowing if we're accelerating our time to market of new products that meet our quality metric. So we consider a successful company one that measures quality, the value of each point being delivered, and their velocity in points. So that way we know how quickly are they accelerating their generation of net present value or return on investment. With that, we can make an investment decision. Right now, those only come from Scrum companies. I've yet to see a Kanban team that generates net present value per point and estimates the flow of that across their cards and can demonstrate acceleration. That doesn't mean they can't, and I encourage them to do it because then we can make some smart investment decisions. So right now, it's just Scrum because of that metric, those 3 metrics. However, I'd be really excited to see that from any type of Agile method because we all know Agile is a great big umbrella of brilliant stuff. But if we can't show the acceleration without compromising quality, we can't put dollars behind it. Is there another question?
More questions?
Thanks for the wonderful presentation, Joe. Could you elaborate on a little bit by what you mean by Scrum for education? I mean, are the teachers called product owners? Did they do a demo in retro every 4 weeks? Do they hit the rules? Wow. Is it the Nokia test? Or what do they do?
Thanks. So I can't say what I mean by Scrum in schools, but I'll say what I saw at EduScrum, because I can't take credit for the awesome work that they've put together, but I can say what I saw. So I walked into the classroom, and in this case, it was a high school science class. They were working on molecular algebra, adding isotopes and electrons to change the molecular composition. And the students walked in, and I was sitting next to their instructor, who I thought was their instructor. We're sitting there chatting, and I noticed all the students pulled out from these folders on the wall these huge pieces of paper, butcher paper, or flip charts. They rolled them out and they hung them on the wall. And they got around them in groups of 4 to 5 people. I didn't think class had started yet. And they were talking to each other, and I noticed it was a backlog with a burn down chart and a happiness metric and a definition of done. I thought, that's kind of cool. I guess this is the EduScrum school. That looks a lot like Scrum. And their backlog items were learning objectives that were required, I think, by the law in the Netherlands. And they moved one into doing, and they checked some that had been in doing, and they moved some of those to done, and one of them back into not doing, depending on the team. And then they sat down, and they started pulling out trade periodicals, most of them on glass laying, in several languages too, which I thought was cool. So they're pulling out magazines and books, and they had a textbook, but they didn't use it much, and it was passed around. And they were looking up molecular algebra in the workplace, actually in trade periodicals, in this case, to lay different types of glass. About halfway through the class, and I realized, oh, this is class. No one has announced class started yet. No one has said anything to the kids. They're just pulling backlog. That guy I was sitting next to stands up, and he spends about 5 minutes at the whiteboard giving a lesson on adding and subtracting electrons to the composition of glass. He sits back down. The students send one person up, I later found out it was the Scrum Master, to take pictures of the whiteboard. They went back to their groups. They moved some more backlog items to done. Near the end of class, the students each got up and gave a demo, and the teacher said if they accepted or rejected the work that the team had done that day, and they passed or failed as a team, and then class was over. They measured velocity, they measured happiness metric, and their definition of done was related to pass-fail criteria and scoring criteria for the core common objectives, I think, for their education. I was very impressed because I've never seen high school age students so focused before, ever, and no one ever told them to do anything. They'd been doing EduScrum since kindergarten, so that's just what they did. They came in, they started pouring into their work. I was also impressed that all the teams had both genders, and if I understood their teacher, he said they self-organized their teams. Also, there was someone in the class that was not neurotypical, so they were mentally slow in some areas. They had been picked by one of the teams early because their type of mind allowed the team to finish work early. They had strengths, and their weaknesses were made up by other people in the team. That was the only time I've ever seen an educational system where non-neurotypical people were desired to have in your team. That's what I saw. You can see more on Twitter at #EduScrum, or there's also eduscrum.com and eduscrum.org. But that was my experience with it. Did I talk to your question, or did I miss it entirely? Okay. Rock.
More questions?
I thought there'd be more questions about testing, because, how do you unit test? How do you regression test? Do you integration test across your 8-module boundaries? What of those are automatable? You're working in hardware. We saw one example of hardware automation, but what are others? I thought you guys would care about that. The manual, oh right, yeah. So we drink a lot of beer, and then whoever's still sober enough gets in the driver's seat, and every Thursday we go integrate the current build of the cars at all the Wikispeed shops, and we drive them around, and we film whatever we do. We invite all of our customers to attend, and they come fairly often because we give them a bunch of beer. Yeah, there is definitely a pattern. Morale is a multiplier for velocity. I have a lot of respect for people who don't drink alcohol for health reasons, but I've noticed if we have beer and they're allowed to drink it, even if they don't drink it, it totally changes the mood. People are willing to try a different skill and pair when they wouldn't have before. People are willing to be filmed in a demo video that we can publish on YouTube where they wouldn't have before, even if they're not drinking. I do think morale as a multiplier for velocity is the entire secret to organizational change. That's my opinion. Well, half of it. The other half is start with HR, human resources, not with the development team. My opinion, your mileage may vary. But morale as a multiplier for velocity is so important, it affects every practice. And if we can do something so simple, like adjust the company policy to have the pop machine full of beer every day, whether or not people drink it, and if we're measuring velocity and quality, we might see surprising patterns. That said, we say beer, but there's gin and wine and vermouth, and yeah. Are there other questions?
More questions? Okay. Thank you very much.